Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where today we will be discussing the article The 24-Inch Gauge, A Measure of Distance and Time by past master Douglas Messimer of Tuckahoe Lodge in Richmond, Virginia.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
Hello, my name is Matthew Appel, and I'm a Mason here at Mill Creek Lodge number 243 in Montlake Terrace, Washington. And with me, I have the usual cast of characters for the Working Tools podcast. We have Worshipful Brother Stephen Chung, who is a past master of Prince Charles 153 up in Kelowna, British Columbia. Worshipful Brother Jarrod Dunham, who's past master of Penticton Lodge number 147 in Penticton. No? He's a member of Penticton Lodge, but he's a past master of some other lodge. So he's a member of Penticton Lodge 147 up in Penticton, British Columbia. And very worshipful brother David Colbeth, who's a past master of King Solomon Lodge number 60 in Auburn, Washington. I apologize, worshipful brother Jarrod, for my gross inaccuracy in the introduction.
That's okay. So many lodges. So many lodges.
and you know, that being recognized as a past master from the lodge you're currently in now, that's a whole other podcast episode.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I didn't mean to open a sore wound there. So back to the topic. Today we're continuing our series of discussing articles that that can be found online. So this one will be found in the show notes as well, as usual. And Jarrod has chosen an article called The 24-Inch Gauge, A Measure of Distance and Time. It was written, as I said earlier, by a past master from Virginia, Douglas Messimer. And, I guess, Jarrod, what spoke to you about this article?
Actually, technically it wasn't the article, it was the subject matter I was searching for. I found it interesting that because I've always wanted to have a discussion on the 24-inch gauge. And it's interesting that if you type that into do your Google foo on your internet, on your computer, then there aren't a lot of articles out there that really delve into anything other than the superficiality of the meaning of it. So I wanted this more I read it. I had some disagreements with some of it. So I thought it would be a good starting point for us to discuss. I was actually kind of interested in everyone else's opinion of the article itself. Was there just anything new that you learned from the article that you didn't know, having sat through Lodge and enough entered apprentice's degree to hear this lecture 1,000 times?
Well, there are many different things that it points out and has you think about in a different way, which I've never heard before. So I thought it was a rather interesting article.
You're already using too many big words, Jarrod. It'll be hard to keep up. I think the idea of the fourth dimension was kind of struck me, and the idea of time. Of course, to us, I was just listening to another podcast earlier, of course, from the Short Talk Bulletin, and it talked about symbols, and so we create these symbols. I mean, everything is a symbol to us. Numbers, geometry, signs, everything. And so we use these symbols to represent something. And so in this case, we created this stick, basically, and divided it up, gave it more symbols with hashes and numbers to indicate something that was originally meant to indicate length and width and depth, potentially. But we modified that into a different symbol. And so for me, it's the underlying idea of symbols in general, but specifically the 24-inch gauge, that cause us as Masons to look at it as a different kind of symbol. The meaning behind the time and how time passes not just how we're supposed to use it to divide our time, but how time passes and we can't get it back.
Right. Well, that's good. Yeah. Matthew, anything to add?
I apparently have nothing lucid to add to the topic. No, I agree. There's some good points in the article, some interesting things to think about. I actually tried to write an article for the Grand Lodge of Washington Research and Education Committee about the 24-inch gauge a while ago, and it was not nearly this well thought out. So I will leave it there.
Well, as with all things with me, the first thing I always do whenever I read an article is I like to go back into the literature and look things up. And I know that Dave likes using Mackey's encyclopedia, but I like a bit more modern in mine. And I use Coyle's, it's only 60 years old now. So I mean but I found it interesting that in it he talks about the fact that the exposés of Masonic ritual in the 18th century don't mention the 24-inch gauge, and the fact that the 24-inch gauge isn't a tool of operative Masons, which got me thinking, is like, well, what do you mean? But I actually went back and tried to try and find it. And it's like, I don't know about down in the States, but growing up, we used a meter stick. You guys would have had like a yardstick. I don't remember ever a 2-foot ruler. So it was obviously this is a symbol that has been created by the ritualists for a very specific purpose. Because, the 24 hours and the stuff. And I find it interesting that it seems like it's one of the only working tools that we discuss that isn't actually historically a working tool of operative Masons. So I don't know if that brings any thoughts to your guys' minds. I find that very interesting. And he discusses because the fourth dimension, how like measuring space and time and stuff like that. So I was trying to figure out this. When I think of the 24-inch gauge, the first thought always comes to mind is time management skills, which is always one of those things that new Masons don't do very well. They join Freemasonry, and then there's a whole bunch of appendant bodies that they can join and a whole bunch of committees that they can join. And all of a sudden, what's supposed to be, an hour a month, they tell us, turns into almost every day. And I find that the lesson of the 24-inch gauge doesn't get we don't take it to heart the way we should from the ritual when we first go through the degrees.
Yeah, I agree with what you were saying earlier about the 24, what you were saying Coyle said about the 24-inch gauge. That, I mean, I actually own a 13-inch ruler, which is a weird thing, but I guess I've seen 24-inch rulers in my life. But
what's that, for left-handers or something?
No, it was back when I lived in New Jersey. It was the local PBS TV station was Channel 13, and as one of their giveaways, if you gave them money, they would send you a 13-inch ruler. So I have a 13-inch ruler, WNET, New York.
It's a baker's ruler.
There you go. But anyway, the point is that yeah, it's sort of an odd set of units, and most of the ones you see, at least that I've seen in lodges, although not all, they're usually hinged in 3 segments of 8, which is, I mean, kind of as you were saying, it's a bit on the nose, don't you think?
Right. It's a bit obvious what they're doing with that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that really just for safekeeping? We have one that's not hinged, but yes, the one we use for degree is generally hinged because it helps to illustrate the idea of dividing your time. But
we have a hinged one that's in our working tools sort of box. Uh-huh. We have a solid one that we use for certain purposes in the 3rd degree.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, my thought, to answer your previous question, Jarrod, about why it's 24 inches, from what I was reading in Mackey's, that the cubit is 20. I thought I saw it was 21 inches, right? Did I miss that? Yeah.
I thought a cubit was from my elbow to the tip of my middle finger.
Well, Get your yardstick out. I mean, your meter stick out.
My meter stick. No, that's from my nose to the end of my finger extended.
Yeah, so the Hebrew cubit, according to Bishop Cumberland, was 21 inches. And so my thought was that I don't know why they did 24 specifically, why not 21? Then you would know exactly it's the right length, but it had to be at least 21 to measure a cubit. So went to 24. That's a good question. Why is it 24?
Well, and if you think about what they're building, like the Solomon's temple, like, because everything we do is about the building of Solomon's temple. And I was like, so are you telling me that every single block was 24 inches wide? Like I've never thought about this. I've never actually thought when visiting places like, Notre Dame and stuff, to actually look at the walls and just look at it with the eye of, is every block in that wall uniform? Like how anal were they about making, like, if someone, because in the article he talks about, if it's a little bit off, I'll just toss it on the rubbish bin and we'll try again. And I'm like,
or like Matt said in past, we'll just use a little extra cement in between.
Yeah, but like so.
Then there is the idea that the base of the building has bigger blocks. That's where I kind of went with it, and it was like, okay, well, yeah, and they'd have smaller blocks going up, right? But that was my only thought on that aspect.
Right. So I guess we're going to be a bit sidetracked by the fact that we're talking more about the operative use of it than the speculative use of it. The other interesting thing, and because it's quoted in the article, is the division, how you're supposed to divide up your 24 hours, which is interesting because, once again, up here in British Columbia, we have multiple rituals, and I can't speak for emulation or Australian because I don't have a copy of them yet. But in the Canadian work, it doesn't actually split your day up evenly into the 3 8-hour blocks. It actually just says that you apportion them to their proper objects. So I find it interesting that in our rituals that you've got one that is very strict about how much are we supposed to adhere to that strictness, and another ritual that just says to take your time and divide it up appropriately. Does that make a big difference?
When I'm explaining it to someone I'm coaching, I describe that yes, well, we are given these proportions, 8 hours, 8 hours, and 8 hours. It's really just to teach that you should be conscious of your time and appropriate with your time. Not so much that you actually should try to work 8 hours, because it's really about, depending on travel and lunchtime, and, it's 10 hours or more in a day. And as much as I like the 8 hours for service to God and distress-worthy brethren, that's a long time every single day.
Man, those distressed brethren.
But they need us that much,
Yeah, I was just gonna say, although you've asked my wife, she'd probably say 8. That's more than 8. and the 8 for refreshment and sleep. Yeah, I suppose some nights it's not 4 or 5 hours of sleep, but yeah, I think it's just to teach us that we're supposed to be proportionate. And I like that idea of the other ritual that talks about whatever you're saying, Jarrod, just that we should pay attention to it. What does it say?
Apportion them to their proper objects.
Yeah.
And then unfortunately it goes into sort of a what do you guys call it down there, your ritual?
About the gauge?
No. What do you call your ritual down there that only has like certain words, but it's mainly letters and
the cipher?
Cipher, yes. So up here in the Canadian work, it goes into a little bit of a cipher, and I can't remember what the first letter stands for.
Well, that's good, I guess, and nobody in a secret anyway. So, yeah, a little squirrel sidetrack here. What is the purpose of the standard work of the cipher?
Are you asking?
Yeah, anybody. I don't know. There's 3 more of you. What's the purpose? What's the purpose of the standard work or a cipher? What do you call the document that you learn from? Do you call it standard work?
No, we call it the ritual book.
Just ritual. Okay.
Yeah, our ritual book.
And is it a lot of it in cipher?
No. Well, no. I could show you, but I'm not going. The ancient work that we do, the book I have I was given when I joined, is there's only a couple of bits with the really, really, really secret stuff that's in Cipher. The rest of it is pretty much all, either just initials for like the different officers and stuff, but it's pretty much written out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing I like about Canada,
the
Matt.
of the penalties, I believe.
Yeah, but the Canadian ritual, like the copy that I have that was given to me because I asked, is mainly in Cipher.
Oh,
like it's not as much, I think, as I've seen what you guys have. Like, yours looks like Morse code sometimes.
It's confusing even to us, because sometimes the same thing doesn't mean something else somewhere else,
right?
Or it's ciphered differently.
I do have a copy of the ancient work that is mostly ciphered. It was a book I inherited from a fellow who passed away, and I got all of his Masonic stuff, right? And I thought that was pretty cool. I was like, what the heck? Whoa, man, I really got to work to read this one, right? Like, oh yeah, I got to really think about what that means. What's that next word, right? Whereas, when it's all written out for you, it's pretty darn easy, right?
Because it saves time.
Right.
I think there's a place for the cipher. I think it does exactly what you're talking about, Steve. It requires that you think about what the words mean and what they are. So I think once you understand what the words are, then moving from clear text to a cipher can enhance your memorization and learning experience. But not having that clear text to start with, you could learn it wrong, or you get frustrated if your coach isn't very. So the reason I ask it is just on a recorded line. I think Washington should move to clear text, because what's the purpose of the standard work or the cipher or the ritual is so that you can learn it, right? Yep. It should be there, should be clear, ready to go. And so there is a. Talking about the Research Education Committee, there's a super smart guy. We should have him on the show someday. He's working on updating the cipher so it's a standardized cipher. So the same TH means the every place, and it's not T sometimes and TH sometimes and TE sometimes. That at least to be a standard cipher. And I say, well, that's awesome, great work. Let's just go to clear text. That's for
yeah.
Anyway, sorry for the squirrel.
I say we go back to mouth to ear.
Because we have enough time to do that these days.
And I'm sure that wouldn't result in there being 75 different versions of the ritual being performed.
Yeah, no.
There's already 75.
Yeah.
Go to 75 lodges and you'll hear 75 different ones. Sorry, Jarrod.
That's okay. I'm just trying to figure out where I was trying to go before this. Come on, don't distract the king of distractions. But just going back to the time management concept, because
well, they say that we as free and accepted Masons are taught to use it for the more noble and glorious purpose of dividing our time. I don't know why that's more noble and glorious than the operative Masons who are using it to measure and lay out their work, but it's a different purpose.
Well, actually, that does actually bring up a point that he brings up in this article about nearer to the end. He talks about basically leaving a legacy, and how important is legacy. It was one of the questions that one of the notes that I wrote down is, spending how, like, is it important to leave something after you shuffle off this mortal coil? And how do we define what is that something that you've left behind and whether or not it's important?
Yeah, I would agree. I think each remainder that somebody leaves behind is unique to them. And so I think it's difficult to judge the validity or weight of that which is left behind by them. Although for some folks it may be easier than others. And obviously, if you can, he cited one of the, does he say it Pike? I think it was Pike he talks about, isn't it? That was.
Yeah, he talks about Pike.
obviously somebody who left his mark and spent his time, his free time, focusing on things. But I think to talk about what Stephen was talking about, the idea of it being more noble and glorious, I think is actually quite true, in that it's not just a stick to measure how long something is or how tall something is or how deep something is. It's again there to determine how much time we should spend on things, and as you said, Jarrod, what things we should spend our time on. That's just
Right.
it's a and so we can use that, and that's where I think the fourth dimension comes in to some extent. It's this weird ability for us to use the symbol for something much greater than what it was designed for.
Right. No, but it's true. I mean, that's exactly why. I mean, I don't think I don't personally think that meaning has been hidden at all. I think it's pretty out there, right in front. We talk about it, but it's just interesting the number of Masons who seem to gloss over this lesson fairly quickly after, without really spending that much time on it. One of the interesting that whenever I talk about time or I read about people and time and stuff is there's an author I've probably brought him up before, is Gay Hendricks. He wrote a book called The Big Leap, and one of the chapters in it he talks about Einstein time and how we need to have a more harmonious relationship with time. He talks about the one thing that sort of really opened my mind was the polite lie that we use when we say, I don't have time. When what we really mean is, I don't want to. Because we all have, Zig Ziglar has this great quote where he talks about lack of direction, not lack of time, is the problem. We all have a 24-hour day. So it's interesting, that, and I hear it all the time in lodge. People, you say, oh, I want to have another, well, I don't have time for another meeting. I'm too busy. And I'm like, well, you do have time. You just don't want to have that other meeting. And if we're more honest about that, then I think things would work better sometimes in our lodges.
Yeah, so much of time management is priorities, is choosing what you're going to spend time on, and that's I think I've said in previous podcasts, I listen to podcasts sometimes about Stoic philosophy, and one of the things that one of the Stoics talked about, and I don't remember which one, which makes me a bad student of this philosophy, I suppose, but the one of them talks about how you would if somebody came up to you and stole your money, you would you'd punch them in the face and say, give me my money back. If your neighbor started building your shed or their shed on your property, you would defend your property. But people come up to you and waste your time all the time, and you don't defend it with the same vehemence for whatever reason. You can get more money, you can get more land, you're not getting more time.
Well, yeah, time is a commodity, and it's and yes, when other people put demands on your commodity, you need to be a bit selfish and be willing to say to them, not now, maybe later, but definitely not now.
I say that to my kids all the time.
Right.
So, yeah, I find it interesting to go back like three things about what you were saying. The 8 hours, I don't know what you call it, ideal paradigm that we're supposed to be held up to is just about impossible. But it's like one of the few times in the ritual that you're actually given direction on how to apply something. Like if you look at the gavel, the common gavel, I'm assuming it's the same everywhere, that you divest your hearts and consciences of the vices and superfluities. It doesn't tell you how. It doesn't tell you which ones you're supposed to be getting rid of. It just says, yeah, go do that. And this one actually gives you the standards to follow, but they're almost impossible to actually follow. I mean, today's Sunday. I didn't work for 8 hours today. What I failed already.
Right.
No, today's when you gave 8 hours to the great architect of the universe, trustworthy brother.
Assuming that you're of the right persuasion that this is the day that you're supposed to do that.
Do I get to count that times 3 right now?
So I think with that, we're running a little short on time. I guess if someone else has another salient point, but I'm not seeing anyone breaking in, so I'll say we're going to wrap up this the first conversation about this article, the 24-inch gauge, a measure of distance and time, and we will come back to it again in our next episode and discuss a little more the philosophy of this important tool. With that, as usual, please engage in our social media. We're more than happy to discuss things we're allowed to discuss online and have little conversations about these articles and about the ideas behind them. And frankly, that's how we learn. So please look into it and let us know what you think and what your thoughts are. With that, on behalf of Jarrod and Stephen and David and myself, thank you all for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again on the Working Tools Podcast. Goodbye.